All right, Pat, this is it. Another season come and gone. The finale of season 3. It's been an interesting season, to say the least. It's weird because it's not quite as action-packed as season 2, but it's also definitely not as slow and deliberate as season 1. It kind of like mixed a little bit of everything kind of together. I don't know. What are your thoughts before we head into the season 3 finale entitled Mhysa?
Hey, Dom, I think the Talkin TV audience is going to agree with me that this episode has too close of a name to Jar Jar Binks' famous phrase. So Mhysa sad to see this season end, but it's got to end somewhere, and here it is tonight.
It does indeed. Yes, all of that and more on tonight's episode. Stay tuned. Oh, man, all the jokes you could have made, and you go with the Jar Jar Binks one. Talk about low-hanging fruit.
Hey,
right
listen,
there.
like, you know, I just kind of looked at the name of the title, and
You're
that's
like,
the first thing that came to mind. Like, you know, I haven't seen Jar Jar Binks in a good, like, you know, decade and a half.
It's been a minute.
It's not a character that I go back and really care about. I usually watch on YouTube the you know, the cut there they edited Jar Jar Binks out.
Oh, that's pretty good. I didn't realize that cut exists. Are we talking like Phantom Menace, or are we talking the whole prequel trilogy?
Yeah, I think it's the Phantom Menace.
Nice. That automatically makes it sound like a better movie. And I already know you like the Phantom Menace to begin with. So
yeah, so basically, I don't even know if that YouTube video exists. I basically heard rumors, and you know, whatever. I actually, when I do watch the Phantom Menace, I endure Jar Jar Binks.
I feel like that's what everyone does after a certain point. But people, we're officially here. We've made it. It's the season 3 finale of Game of Thrones, of Talkin Thrones, everything. Season 3, episode 10, entitled Mhysa. And so this episode is going to be an interesting one for a couple of different reasons. Number one, because I'm just making this announcement at the beginning of this video. This will officially be our last episode that we release in 2021. We're going to take a big, long break for the holidays before we come back strong in January with season 4. We're going to wrap this thing up. Season 4 all the way through the final season in 2022. Ultimately, the other big reason why this finale kind of feels so momentous is, number one, it might, honestly, of the first 3 seasons finales, right? We obviously know that the show goes in a drastically different direction. Obviously, we know the budget starts to get up. The focus starts to shift a little bit, right? The first 3 seasons we primarily spent featured around Ned Stark. And even though Ned Stark dies at the end of season 1, we still kind of follow like the ripple effects of that throughout the next 2 seasons. But after this season, after the events at the Red Wedding, after Robb and Catelyn Stark's death, you have a tremendous part of the story that's removed from the action. So the emphasis as time goes on, like the whole Ned Stark thing kind of fades into the background, and we start to focus a little bit more on Jon and his quest with the wildlings and everything going on in the north. We start to focus more on Daenerys and everything going on with Essos, and like we kind of start to see the shift towards the finale that we would ultimately get. The other big thing,
well, the war is over, so
right,
it totally makes sense. You know, Ned Stark, everyone goes to arms. It's all about the Lannisters versus the Starks, and one by one, the Lannisters basically dwindled down the Starks to either dead or irrelevant, like missing in action. So, you know, here it is. The Lannisters are looking strong, and, you know, it's about them. The show shifts towards them basically maintaining their power and over the throne.
It's pretty interesting because I feel like an argument could be made here that in some instances, and I believe that this has been verified a little bit by Martin as well as both Benioff and Weiss, there's a strong argument to be made that the show could have easily just ended here, right? The Lannisters are, obviously there's still a lot of stuff, you know, that kind of gets left off the table, right? Obviously Jon makes it back to the wall. Daenerys, obviously, with her kind of conquest across Essos, obviously everything there seems to be more stuff there. But like, just as far as like kind of the majority of the plot, like kind of where the show started with the bulk of its primary storylines, there's an argument to be made that this show could have ended here. But I think the interesting thing, obviously, is once again, we've talked about this a lot over the course of these last 30 episodes that we've done. God, I still can't believe that this is our 30th episode that we've done, is that this is still the end of part one of the story. Because famously, as we know, the first two books in the series, A Game of Thrones and A Clash of Kings, were adapted fully into seasons 1 and 2. But book 3, A Storm of Swords, is adapted into both seasons 3 and 4. Famously, the first 2/3 of the book are this season 3, but there's still a lot left of the story that needs to be wrapped up. So that's why, again, it's very strange, because this is still technically part 1 of 2, right? So it technically should feel like a cliffhanger, but it doesn't in a strange way. It still feels like that, like it feels like it wraps itself up in a way that almost like seasons 1 and 2 didn't, because seasons 1 and 2 still left you like wanting more. I don't know. What's your take on that?
I think I agree. I think like the show is basically primed for what's next, right? Arya in this episode, looks at the coin again, and we have that nice little musical interlude, going back to the Man of Bravos, and it's really echoing what's going to happen at the end of next season. So they are, playing with the idea of, setting up these little breadcrumbs to get us to where we got to go. But for the most part, it's essentially like it's a new day. We don't really know what's gonna take place next. I think a lot of things get wrapped up neatly in this season finale. Obviously it's just those setups that are going to pay off later that are here. It's still getting us ready for the next season. But I don't think until season 4, episode 2, where we have that kind of big Joffrey wedding.
Right. The next of the who knew that after the Red Wedding, one of the biggest events in television history that centered around a wedding, and we would have Joffrey's death like only a year and like 2 episodes later.
Yeah. So like I think watching season 4, watching those behind the scenes thing that Benioff and Weiss do at the end of each episode, I think they talked about season 4 changing the formula and trying to do like a very early on, almost like, event that they save for the penultimate episode, doing it so early on so that it really ripples throughout the season. And I think they successfully do that in the next season. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but, just watching this episode and seeing, how it just sets up a few things, it's relatively quiet, so to speak. Compared to like the other ones, and it's because season 4 early on really sets us up with a bang.
Right, absolutely. And we'll get into that obviously next year, or rather in 2 months once we get into season 4, which again, I still go back and forth all the time as to whether or not I like season 4 or season or season 6 better. I think obviously season 6 is the bigger of the spectacles, but season 4 has probably like 5 of my favorite moments on the entire show. But we'll get to that in a little bit. In the meantime, let's tackle this episode. So like I said, we're in wrap-up phase again, but each of the storylines that happen in this episode, again, it's very interesting how some of them feel wrapped up and others don't. So let's cut back in quick with the Riverlands. It's so strange because obviously we spend so much time in the Riverlands between the 3 prime storylines with Robb, with Jaime and Brienne, with Arya. The next season, obviously, and for the next couple seasons, honestly, it kind of vanishes ultimately, and it comes back in bits and pieces as the show goes on, but it's like this entire thing is vanquished. We pick up at the twins right after the events of the first episode. It's not at all like it's interesting, kind of the parallels between this finale and penultimate versus season 1's finale and penultimate, where you had Ned Stark's death at the end of episode 9 of season 1, and then episode 10, it almost like cuts to like different locations as you're seeing the ripple effects. This episode plays out similarly in that you see the immediate ripple effects of the Red Wedding as they kind of make their way across all the different kingdoms and kind of influences the characters' decisions as far as what they're going to do next. But it picks up and opens right at the twins. The Red Wedding is still technically going on. Roose Bolton walks out onto the, parapets, whatever those things are, on top of the castle, and witnesses like there is still a lot of carnage that's going on. There's fires everywhere.
Yeah, well, they gotta kill the Stark soldiers, and I think this is a great scene. Like you basically have people fighting for their lives. It's a surprise attack. They didn't really expect their leaders to be killed at a wedding. It's basically, sort of that lambs to the slaughter type feel. Like, that the Boltons and the Freys have the upper hand, but you still see people fighting for their lives. And I think one of the greatest parts of this is all the chaos. You see the Hound and Arya sort of witnessing it, and then all of a sudden you just hear this chanting like "King of the North, King of the North, King of the North." And
as if we couldn't get more barbaric than what we witnessed in the previous episode. This just drives the point right home.
Listen, I love how it's almost like the worst prop in television history, like the fake wolf head on top of the body.
It's so bad.
But it's like, do you really expect the Freys to do a great job, like of sewing a wolf's head on top of a body? So it's almost like the prop, to me, looks so like cheesy and fake and whatever, and it's like, well, that's as good as a Frey could do. So it's believable from an audience perspective of like how cheesy that prop is. But obviously the whole point of it is the Hound picks up a banner of the Freys or the Boltons. Right. I think it's the Freys.
Yeah, it's
so that they can get out of camp. But Arya essentially is just traumatized by seeing her brother and her brother's wolf, set up in this manner, and that's really the main part of.
Can we talk about Arya for a second and the fact that this is like the second major of traumatic events that she's had to witness and see? First, obviously, her dad's death in the first season. Then she spends the entire next 2 seasons. Well, she spends 1 season trapped in Harrenhal, and then she spent the entirety of this past season getting dragged around from person to person. She wanted to get to her brother, and then she finally gets to her brother because of the most unexpected places. Boom, Red Wedding happens, and she just witnesses. It's literally like I feel like Arya within these first couple books before they kind of lost track, and like even George R. R. Martin didn't realize what he really wanted to do with her. It's almost like Arya is kind of like the personification of us in that scene, where it's like, Jesus Christ, it's like, can this girl catch a friggin' break? And where she's kind of like the witness to like the tragedy that befalls like all these like good and noble characters, And I don't know, like there's kind of something really interesting there, and I think this also follows up with the scene next, obviously, when they stumble upon the camp of the Freys, right? The Hound at that point is just concerned with survival and everything, but like she's essentially now had to witness the downfall of prominent members of her house twice in a row now. And like I can't even begin to imagine what that does to a girl of her age at that time period. She's still got like a little bit of a violent streak in her, but I feel like this is like what solidifies just like her becoming like that cold and like dead figure that we, cold-eyed figure that we
listen, this is her Dexter Morgan moment, right? She becomes a serial killer that goes after the bad guys, like truly in this scene. Like she kind of waddles up to the campfire and basically is like, "Please, sir, can I sit by the fire?"
I love the Oliver Twist fake out. I love that.
Yeah, it's exactly what's gonna happen.
Of course.
And the fact is, they're just like, "Go away. We don't want you here." Like, does F off mean something different in your language? All this type of stuff just to get rid of this kid. And she goes ahead and just like starts stabbing
away. I love the fake out too, where she shows off the coin of Bravos and then drops it, and then the Hound comes up and she's like, "Where did you get that knife?" And he's like, "I got it from you," and she just gives it to him. I love the balancing act between them, and I love like kind of where that's going to take their relationship.
Oh yeah, and it's a great shot, between the Hound and Arya. It just camera's down low, looking up. You got the Hound like towering over her in the background, and it's we don't talk that much about how this show is shot, but it's just a great scene and how it comes together. And I think it's one of those things where the Hound tells her like, "Hey, next time you're gonna do something crazy that involves killing, just let me know." And that's I feel like that is totally, he's a killer, right? And she knows he's a killer, and that's all he needs to know. It's like, "Hey, you want to kill those guys? Like, yeah, let me know." Like he's 100% like, ruthless, as he says. Obviously he has the honor. He's protecting Sansa. He's protecting Arya. He's doing right by them. But he is a killer. And at the end of the day, that's what this show is full of. The Mountain's a more ruthless killer. He would just probably kill Sansa. He would probably kill Arya. So in a land of killers, it's like, you're basically only alive, based on like whatever sense of honor they have. And it's like Arya could have been like, "I want to kill those 4," and the Hound would have been like, "Okay, let's do it."
Yeah,
pretty much. He's that much of a killer.
the Hound still continues to be one of the most fascinating and probably one of my favorite characters just throughout the course of the show. Just like kind of his warped sense of justice where he pretends to be this hardened killer, but underneath, like, that damaged exterior, he kind of does have this like really like kind of like soft, tender heart especially towards innocent figures. And what's it called? There's the last scene of the Riverlands that I wanted to talk about. It's kind of the last scene that takes place there before we cover like the other major storylines, and it kind of transitions and like also wraps up the Theon arc in a strange way. But it's the conversation between Roose Bolton and Walder Frey. I think that's probably like one of my favorite instances because like it's not like the Lannisters who we've kind of like gotten to know over the course of these last couple seasons as like these really interesting moral gray areas, right? Roose Bolton and Walder Frey have both kind of been established as like these really shifty, really untrustworthy figures, and then these last two episodes kind of solidified it, obviously with kind of their act together, because we still don't know. Well, actually, no, because this sequence takes place after all the King's Landing stuff. So we do know by this point now that the two of them were officially bankrolled. It was officially, there were some letters exchanged between them and Tywin Lannister. This basically kind of confirms everything that they had been talking about, that had been being hinted at in the last episode, that the two of them both saw an opportunity, Walder Frey to inherit the Riverlands and Roose Bolton to inherit the North. And basically they realize, we're kind of better off with Tywin Lannister than we are with Robb Stark, and they have an interesting conversation about it. And
oh god, the best part about this conversation is the young wolf,
and then
Roose Bolton. Yeah. Oh man, it's the dialogue's great, the delivery's great. Like the two of them, like I said last week, the two of them are. At least Walder Frey is like low-level bad guy. There's really no reason. There's no benefit. I understand that like now they have the Lannisters as an ally, but like the Lannisters could wipe them out anytime they need. Exactly. It's just they
Jamie
don't
even makes a
want
point
to.
of that in the season 6 finale after the whole Riverlands Admiral Tully Blackfish thing, and he's like, well, guess what? If the Lannisters have to come and help you every single time you have problems, why do we need you again? And then obviously we see that.
Well, I think that's one of the things I like about the later seasons when Dany does come to Westeros. It actually is the fact that the Lannisters have this like really tight control over things.
Right.
I think we could have seen more of it, developed a little more. But I think that really does set up the nice clash between Dany and Cersei towards the end of the show. But that's getting a little too far ahead of us. But listen, Walder Frey is sort of like the low level Bond villain that gets killed in the first sequence. like just one of the non-essential henchmen.
I think the breakdown between those two right here and kind of their individual kind of motivations are really fascinating. Where Walder Frey is kind of motivated only by like not just by personal gain, but also just kind of like this act of jealousy. The fact that he doesn't like that all the other lords kind of look down upon him. They don't take him seriously. He kind of did this almost like one big revenge stunt against Hoster Tully that was kind of years in the making. Versus Roose Bolton. Roose Bolton even kind of admits, he's like, I had really no enmity or ill will towards Robb. He just wouldn't listen to me at all. He made all the wrong moves, and so it was simply a tactical advantage. Looking for it's like, what am I going to do? Ride with this guy until I die? Or, take an advantage, get a little something for myself. It kind of establishes the difference between the two, which I think is ironic because Roose Bolton ultimately ends up dying before Walder Frey for kind of the same reasons.
But I think, Walder Frey's motivations are like revenge. I think he's sort of already at the end of his life. There's the whole idea of Bolton's like, oh, you'll have to get a new wife. And he's like, oh, that's at least what I have to look forward to, like for the most part. He seems like he's done with life. He's sort of going through the motions. Like, he wants revenge before he leaves this world. It's a very interesting character. Walder Frey, we don't explore it really that much more. He disappears and then just comes back to be murdered.
Yep.
But for the most part, he almost tanks his family's house because like he's right in the center. And he just put himself between the Boltons and the Lannisters, both who are a little more, serious when it comes to winning the Game of Thrones. And so, and he's just haphazardly like, I'm going to drink wine. I got these great allies. Like, these allies basically have proven time and time again in this show alone that they're willing to betray people and get rid of them. And it's like Walder Frey is not thinking about the long term.
Nope. What is it that you keep saying? The people who don't see the long term, who don't play the Game of Thrones, those are the ones that get killed really quickly.
Yeah, but he doesn't even like. He's just so far removed, and Deft comes to his door in the end, and it's
Indeed.
like he's not even trying to go for any new territory. He just has his, and he wants it. He wants to drink wine. He wants to, just exist, and
Right. I mean, like you were talking about last episode, he literally views the Red Wedding as like a show. He's like, wow, this is like the best show that I've had probably in years, So
Yeah.
that's really fascinating. But the other big takeaway from this scene is kind of like confirming all the ambiguity that came around Theon and like kind of all the stuff we didn't see between seasons 2 and 3, where we last saw Theon at the end of season 2 being dragged away by the Ironborn after being knocked out, and then we first see him in season 3 and he's being tortured and the whole run around by Ramsay. And not only do we get obviously the confirmation of officially what happened here, where Roose tells him, it's like, look, Robb Stark had me send a letter to my bastard that he would go easy on the Ironborn if they handed over Theon. The Ironborn handed over Theon, but Ramsay is his way. So not only does this kind of clue us in as to what happened up there, but it also finally clues us in as if, it's really interesting because like book readers, again, like because this is the only storyline that really didn't happen at all in the books. It happened off the page. So I don't even know like kind of what book readers stands for. I have a feeling that they pretty much assumed that it was Ramsay, but this is like the full official confirmation that this is Ramsay Bolton. This is Roose Bolton's bastard son. As we cut immediately to the Dreadfort, right? This is the only sequence we get of him. Picking up right after 3 episodes later, where the last we saw of these two was, Ramsay unfortunately taking off Theon's favorite toy. And
listen. The whole bit with the sausage is so immature and so great at the same time. It's one of those things where, well, it's in the context of Ramsay being this sadistic, just fella that's toying with Theon's. That's toying with Theon's, whole emotions and just mindset. It continues that torture, and it's like, oh, you don't think I'm a cannibal, do you? It's like, no, this is just pork sausage. Great performance by the 2 actors in this scene, because Theon is just like, kill me. And Ramsay's like, no, we need you.
You're much more valuable to us alive than dead.
Yeah, exactly. But it's all, the whole bit with the sausage happens, and then it's also like, this is the moment where he goes up to Theon and he's like, oh man, you reek. And then he gets the bright idea. Well, guess what? That's your new name. It's to simplify the torture, because this would probably take weeks and weeks of torture to get Theon to really start calling himself Reek and having this new, destroyed personality. They basically do the move of threes where, Ramsay just punches him 3 times. Right. And on the 3rd time,
Theon is so weak and despondent. Right. And Theon is so weak and despondent at this point that he obviously kind of has no choice but to go along with that. Again, like Theon is, It's kind of crazy that in the season with the Red Wedding, it's kind of safe to say that like still that Theon has definitely undergone like the most amount of tragedy this season. But I think that, again, the reason why this scene is interesting and important and not just kind of like another like quick throw-in scene that's just there to wrap up the storylines of the season is that this also kind of in a way adds more context to the sequence of the Red Wedding, because this entire time, right, for the most part, we haven't heard Ramsay's name. We didn't know why he was torturing Theon. It seemed to be that he was just torturing him for the sake of torture, but there was almost like this small little bit where it's like, okay, while Robb is dealing with everything in the South, right? This is the chance to like, his revenge, his subtle revenge on Theon, right? We didn't really know why that is. But now obviously that we've seen like kind of what the Bolton's real aim was throughout it, we come to realize that, oh no, this is just another facet. And ultimately Theon, it's continuing to blur the lines even further than they were already blurred, right? Where we spent an entire season with Theon having this existential grappling of kind of who he was identity-wise, and he just kept making wrong decision after wrong decision after wrong decision, and now he's seeing kind of the comeuppance for that, but the kind of the place where it comes from is from a place that really nobody is expecting, where you just get this sadistic person who happens to be related to the guy who made this giant plan to take over the North, and he's kind of just like toying around with him because he's his plaything, and also reveals that like there's kind of no other reason why they have Theon other than the fact that he is useful to them, because they can use him as a bargaining tool in order to get the Ironborn out of the North. Again, in a strange way, like, it's way more intelligent than anything Robb had planned.
Yeah, so the 2 things that they're trying to do, one is, as we see the unboxing that happens in the
how that cuts to Pike.
Iron Isles.
First time we've seen Pike in an entire season.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, basically, Papa Greyjoy's reading the letter, and it's like, you will kind of remove yourself from the north. You will seize the territory back. It's like the best line in that letter is, I took his favorite toy and he cried when I took it away from him, or whatever, however
Yeah,
it's phrased.
messed up stuff, to say the least.
Yeah, it's but the whole point is, like, even if they do not drop their weapons and leave, the whole point is to demoralize them, get them rattled up. We see this, at the Battle of the Bastards, like, Sansa warns Jon, he's going to do whatever it takes to rattle you up and get you to make the wrong move. And that's what Ramsay is doing here, is by sending this to the Greyjoys and promising that he's going to send other parts if they don't respond. Is you're trying to get them to act at an emotional level and make the wrong move, and therefore giving the Boltons the upper hand. And we can see sort of that, what the Boltons are doing. We can see the mechanics of how they are gaining their power and how they plan to maintain it. And I think that just kind of grows as the seasons go on to make Ramsay the ultimate bad guy for the second half of the series.
Yeah, I feel like this is just more of emphasis on the fact that what you were talking about last season, where it's like, yeah, the Greyjoys, their whole way of life and just living makes no sense. And now, not only did we see like kind of this entire season of torture with Theon, of kind of his repercussions for his actions, but now you get to see the repercussions on all of them, going all the way back up to Balon, and how Balon, right? It's interesting because this instance should technically be like the Euron scene where Balon dies, but instead you get this whole like, no, instead what's he going to do? He's going to double down on their position. And not only that, but he's going to abandon his only son. And even Yara looks at him and is like, dude, what are you doing? She's like,
yeah, what is it? He's like, I made my decision. Get that out of my face.
I made mine. Because
exactly.
Again, it's displaced because the problem is we only get one scene with any of the Greyjoys outside of Theon in the next season before we have to go an entire season with no other Greyjoys before they kind of come back in season 6 and they kind of bring that storyline back. So it's a little bit displaced as far as kind of the trajectory of the story. But the interesting thing is that it starts to show that like maybe Yara should have been a little bit more not welcoming, but should have been a little bit more like kind of gentle towards her brother ultimately in the last season, where the last season she was kind of like on Balon's side, kind of picking on him, demoralizing him, emasculating him. And this season she kind of realizes, is like, look, at the end of the day, this is my brother and your son. We have to do something, or else this entire expedition doesn't mean anything. And he's like, he's not even a man anymore. Why should I even bother? Again, just kind of the old school mentality versus the new school mentality. We were talking about Walder Frey. I think Balon Greyjoy is another perfect example of somebody who just cannot get a hint when it smacks him upside the head. And so Yara kind of makes her decision. She's like, look, I'm going to take 30 of our best fighters. We're going to go to the north and we're going to get Theon and we're going to bring him home because, I may not like him that much. You may not like him that much, but at the end of the day, he is important. And if we don't do this, then our entire kind of expedition and quest will be for nothing. I'm kind of grasping at a lot of straws because, again, just kind of Benioff and Weiss's treatment of the whole Ironborn storyline just is so drastically different than the books. I know everybody always talks about the Martells and how drastically they changed that storyline, and much to its detriment. But I honestly think that the Ironborn got done just as dirty as the Martells were in the show. But that's kind of a quick wrap up. So you want to hit King's Landing next, or do you want to hit the rest of the North next?
Yeah, I think let's hit the rest of the North because I think the King's Landing is sort of more the bread and butter of this episode.
Yeah, so, absolutely. So the rest of the North, as far as like plot and action wise goes, the big things, obviously, Sam and Gilly finally making it through the Night Fort. Bran, again, we've been seeing this weird thing happen throughout this season, obviously, between all kind of the parties that find themselves in the North. Bran and Jon obviously had that encounter last episode without them even realizing that they were in the same location. And now this episode, Bran ends up running into Sam once they reach the wall. And it's kind of this interesting little reaction where, again, even though Bran has been pretty removed from everything this season and he has no conception of the Red Wedding, I think it's some very interesting little foreshadowing, right? Where his group, they've separated from Osha and Rickon. They reach the Night Fort, which is the castle that they wanted to reach, which they know is a castle that contains a tunnel that goes underneath the wall so they can get through. And Bran starts telling them this story of the Rat King, and he kind of breaks down the story ultimately of how this Lord of the Night Fort wanted to appease the king. So he ended up, what was it? He wanted revenge or something. So he ended up cooking the king's own sons in a pie and fed it to him. And the whole thing that's broken down, it's meant to, it's led up to make it seem like it's going to be a ghost story But after the fact, it's revealed that Bran says, like, no, the dude didn't get punished by the gods because he killed them or anything. It's because he broke guest rights. And they're like, yeah, one of the most sacred things that you do not do. It's like in Greek mythology, I always think of whenever, you break an oath on the river Styx. It's like, that's just something you don't do ultimately.
Yeah,
And
well, it's in Greek mythology, it's the concept of xenia, which is, when you're greeting your guests, you're sort of grabbing them by the knees and welcoming them in and all that type of stuff.
Right.
So, it goes back to Greek mythology for sure, and it's it's one of those things where if anything's going to tell us about Game of Thrones, it's going back to using like mythology, using sort of medieval history to really root this story, in reality.
most definitely.
Yeah, the thing I like about this scene a lot is, and this is where, I tell people, like, sometimes you got to be on the nose. And I feel like this scene particularly is when Sam kind of comes up, it's like, oh, who are you? Like, whatever. Bran starts going like, oh, my brother's in the Night's Watch. And
Right.
he gets cut off. But, he says everything that needs to be said. And then Sam pieces it together.
Right,
The dire wolf.
I think it's really awesome. But like real quick,
Yeah.
back guest rights thing. The whole big thing that this is foreshadowing is the fact that and Davos talks about this a little bit more so in the books, not necessarily this episode, but that's the whole big thing. And I'll get to that when we get to Davos's story arc and everything that happens in this episode. Because I honestly think that low key Davos is the MVP of this episode, as he is in most episodes, but this episode in particular. But the biggest thing here that Bran establishes is the fact that it's like, look, you guest rights is something that you don't mess with. And it kind of foreshadows that something bad is going to happen to the Freys at some point later on because they've broken this sacred oath. Because, like, and you even saw it, like, Walder Frey in the last episode went out of his way to say, yes, you're protected under my house under guest rights before violating that. But so it's a couple hours later, Sam and Gilly, it's so funny how they build that up where you hear that Sam's heavy breathing because Sam is, a little bit overweight and just can't do anything without breathing heavily, like physical, I should say. And so they think it's like some sort of like monster that's coming for them. And they end up having their encounter with them, and Sam pieces it together. And I kind of love this interaction because it's almost like one of those things where it's another one of those infamous Game of Thrones pairings off where it's like, wow, you never expect these two characters to work as well as they do together.
Well, like I said, it's beautifully written because, Sam even goes, oh, and I know of Odor, it's the whole idea that you're showing Sam's familiarity with Jon to the point where he can, easily earn the trust of Bran in this scene because there's, no way that this guy would know anything about, Bran and Odor and Jon unless he did spend some time with him. So, I find that, just having, like you say, these two groups of people, who probably wouldn't really cross paths. It seems like I think you made the point last week where it seems like it's forced that they actually kind of line up and meet just because of the geolocation of where they were headed. But like the fact is, it's like this sort of like fantasy scene that we get to see of two groups of our characters meeting each other and having just one interaction before going off on their own storylines again.
Right.
I think it's just well done. It basically helps propel them in the directions that they need to go. And, it's a well done sequence in my opinion.
What's interesting here is that, so of all the storylines that happen in this episode, this is probably this one, and then I'll say Davos' storyline are probably the ones that definitely feel the most like cliffhangers, right? Where it feels like, okay, no, this is deliberately setting up for more stuff. Like this storyline does not feel complete. And the biggest thing is that ultimately, right, we're still, the problem is at this point in this show, we still weren't as familiar with kind of where Bran's storyline was going to go, obviously with the Three-Eyed Raven and all the sorcerer stuff. But this to me is the sequence that kind of locks in. It's like, okay, so whatever happens going forward, Bran has a part to play against the White Walkers, because up until this point, the only people that have really had any interaction with the White Walkers, obviously Jon throughout the first two seasons, but then obviously between the ending of season 2 and throughout the course of this entire season, ultimately Sam ends up playing a big part in the conquest of what happens with the White Walkers, both kind of with his discovering of what the dragon glass can do, and obviously killing the White Walker, and then obviously with his studying in the Citadel. But there's also stuff that kind of comes where there's a reason why of the two characters that are able to figure out, obviously, the whole Jon and Dany thing that happens later on in the show. It's these two characters. And I love how this is kind of really well set up here. And before they kind of go on their own individual journeys, right? Sam and Gilly to the wall and Bran north of the wall. And he even says it too, but like they kind of come to a mutual understanding where Sam doesn't necessarily, believe in magic, but he's also like well read enough to understand about magic. And so when Jojen kind of makes him understand, he's like, yeah, look, you've seen the army of the dead and the White Walkers, and you know that there's nothing that could stop them. But there's a chance that if we go north of the wall, we might be able to find something that nobody else does as far as being able to stop them. And so that's enough to convince Sam. So they kind of send them off on their merry way. It's kind of a really interesting haunting shot as we follow them, like kind of go through the tunnel before we kind of follow them sporadically as they make their way to the Weir Tree throughout the course of the next season. But we cut to, obviously, Sam and Gilly make it back to Castle Black. It's a great scene with Meister Aemon, where a couple things where Sam is trying to tell Gilly how to pronounce it properly. And then the thing that's established here both is Sam's kind of commitment to the Night's Watch and his vows. And then the biggest thing is that Sam is able to, again.
Yeah, his lawyeristic, I know the whole oath, and these are the exact words.
Right. And she kind of breaks it down that she's one of Craster's wives, which of course Meister Aemon knows about. And the whole importance of this sequence right here is the fact that it's like, look, the whole reason for Mormont going north, right? It ended up being such a disaster between the attack of the Fist of the First Men and then everything that went down at Craster's. But the thing that's proven here is that, Mormont's whole reason for going north has now been proven. The White Walkers are real and they're coming for everyone. And so Aemon understands that.
Yeah, it's also that they found the Dragon Glass and Sam found out what it does, which is kill the White Walkers. And, I think that's a very important thing for Aemon and everyone to figure out as, that there is sort of this big threat and a way of killing it.
Right, exactly. And so he instructs Sam to say, he tells Gilly that she's welcome there, and he instructs Sam to start sending out letters to all the lords in Westeros, kind of informing them of the danger.
Feed the ravens, because they're all flying tonight.
They're all flying. Again, it's another instance of showing where the trajectory of the show is shifting. It's like, look, we're kind of shifting away from a lot of the political squabbles. Ultimately, there will be new ones that come in the next couple seasons, but we're shifting away from the political squabbles and understanding, between over the course of the next couple seasons, season 4 through 6, the threat of the White Walkers is going to be fully imposed here. It's like kind of no more hiding in the shadows. People know about them. They are coming, and we have to prepare. And obviously, one of those letters finds their way to Davos. We'll get to that in a little bit. But there's one last thing in the north that happens. Obviously, Jon is just trying to get a drink of water. It's really his only sequences here. And, oh, man, obviously, of course, Ygritte is able to track him down.
Well, I think this is the moment between the two of them where it's like, hey, we are on these two separate sides. Right. And Jon still doesn't get it. He's loyal to his side despite the fact
never had feelings for emotionally, which is something he's never really had to grapple with before.
Yeah, but even though they had these intimate conversations about it's about the two of us, these two sides do not care about us. He still chooses his side over the two of them. And this, it's all subtle. It's all under the context of what we're seeing in the scene. But essentially, she is bound by her side to kill him as a traitor. Right. And he's bound by his side to sort of get away and warn them about the whole, sneak attack that's going to happen in the next season. And I think it's one of those things where what we're seeing is both of them kind of holding back. Because they do love each other. They're getting their feelings out there, but, unfortunately, they're bound by the situation. And, Ygritte gets 3 arrows, essentially into Jon, but in places that are not going to kill him, just wound him.
Yeah.
And, I think this is brought up later on, that Ygritte, one arrow would have been enough. You got 3, he should have been dead. So
but it shows ultimately again, just the attachment, the bond that they formed between the sides. And it's, I both love and hate this scene because it's so great kind of establishing the sides that they're on, but it does establish they do have feelings for each other. And again, in any other relationship, any other way, if they weren't on opposite sides feuding. And like I said, she ultimately showed Jon a perspective that he didn't have before. And the thing that sucks so hard about this scene too is this is the last scene that they get with each other before she dies. And I know obviously the Red Wedding is also tragic, but for me, Ygritte Ygritte is still probably like the top 3 saddest deaths for me on the entire show, both because of what she meant to Jon and also just because of how awesome of a character she was. And
you know,
so
we'll get there later on, but
we'll get there. But like the whole thing that this
the
foreshadows with the arrows, it's like, oh,
yeah,
man.
the way that the death happens, like the two, like, because a lot of it is so unspoken between the two of them, and like, but us, we as the audience understand what's being said with the eyes, and that's what, you know, visual filmmaking and storytelling is about.
Right.
You know, and just since you referenced it, the scene in which she dies, like, basically the two of them are staring at each other. They come, you know, they reconcile. And that's when you know, the young lad basically decides to kill Ygritte, and it's just one of those things where it's like we the audience have invested so much, you know, energy and enjoyment in these two characters and their bond, that just the happenstance of war tears that apart is very tragic. So, you know, I can't wait till we get to that point. But again, like, just the way they handle these two characters and their sort of emotional arc throughout the series, you know, it's just really amazing.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite storylines on the entire show, and it's I'm like, oh man, only 9 more episodes, then I have to relive easily one of the most gut-wrenching deaths on the entire show. Fun. Let's get to King's Landing. So we've got a lot that happens here, even though again it is mostly conversational, as is most of the stuff that's happened. So again, like, we're seeing the thing that I love about this episode and how it plays out structurally is, again, we're seeing the fallout and kind of how that ripples. And I think what I like too is we're seeing it in a lot more of like a linear fashion than we did 2 seasons ago in Fire and Blood, where you have this moment where Tyrion and Sansa are actually kind of starting to bond. They're starting to, like, you know, start to form a little bit of like a relationship, you know, obviously after Tyrion proved himself as like the best of the Lannisters 2 episodes ago by not taking advantage of her. They kind of like are trading origin stories back and forth about how it's like, oh, Tyrion is like, oh, how I remember names. That way, you know, if you know, it's not good to have a rich lord's you know, angry at you, and then Sansa tells her, it's like, we should do this thing that Arya used to do, where we would cut open a hole in the bed and like throw goat shit in there, and then you would have this awful smell in your room, but you would have no idea where it comes from.
Yeah,
it's
so
a great little bonding back and forth.
I feel like that whole bit with Sansa is it's great because it reminds you as the audience that, you know, how like young and naive she still is. You know, and it's like you kind of know that throughout the series, but like this is a chance of, you know, the show to show you that in like sort of a joking, positive manner. Like she still reminisces about, you know, her youth and just, you know, those days of being innocent and not really having too many consequences. You know, it's like playing a good gag on someone. But she's talking about bringing it into the Game of Thrones, right? You know, like that's such a feeble, you know, laughable action. Like, could you imagine, you know, it's like doing that to Cersei's bed? Like she's gonna basically kill everybody.
Literally,
you know,
it's kind of crazy. Ultimately, again, it's ironic, and I think it's really interesting that they and kind of, you know, foretelling that they have this scene, because this is probably the last instance that we see Sansa like acting naive just in general about things, because of course the next scene is Podrick runs up, summons Tyrion to a small council meeting, and at the council meeting it's revealed obviously what happened at the Red Wedding. And I love Dinklage's performance. Again, it's been very kind of underplayed this entire season because he obviously took such a big backseat in the storyline after everything that happened in season 2. And so whenever he has those great moments to act just so subtly, where he sits down at the table, Pycelle gives him the letter, well, drops it on the floor, then forces him to pick it up. And then he reads it as like, Rosalind Frey caught a nice fat trout. Her father gave her a couple of wolf pelts as a wedding gift. And he's like,
is this bad poetry?
Bad poetry, or is this supposed to mean something? And then Joffrey kind of clues it in. The look on Dinklage's face here is priceless, just as far as acting goes, because it's this whole thing, like, all the realizations are hitting him, where it's like, again, he never hated the Starks the way that the rest of the family. He understands that they were at war, but like, Tyrion, again, comes from a different mindset than Tywin and the rest of his family. The rest of his family is like, no, we have to kill all of our enemies. And Tyrion's like, well, why can't we just make peace with them? And Tyrion, of course, knows that this whole war got started because of some very stupid actions. And now kind of seeing, like, it's almost like kind of his awakening to, like, the brutalities of what his family can do. And, like, he's probably always known to some extent, but, like, again, he was too young. He was like, what, only, like, really, like, 10, 13 years old, you know, 10, 13 years old when the whole massacre of King's Landing and, you know, the destruction of the Targaryens and like Elia Martell and everything that happened there happened. So this is really his first like kind of awakening as to what his family is truly capable of.
And I think him and Tywin have the whole idea of like, you know, you kill them at a wedding, and it's like, well, what's the difference between killing a few leaders at a wedding and killing thousands on a battlefield?
Right.
You know, and so it is the stark difference between the two of them and their mindsets comes to play here. But, you know, come on, the center stage of this scene
Joffrey
is just
your
like
favorite character.
Yeah. Listen, Joffrey just being like, I am the king.
I am the king. And Tywin's response. It's amazing.
It's amazing.
But Joffrey does bring up something really interesting here where he's like, my father won the real battle. You know, kind of almost like a payoff to like that sequence that they had a couple episodes ago where he's like, he took the crown. He was the one that did the fighting while you hid under Casterly Rock. Again, showing that Joffrey just has no conception of strategy.
Yeah, he doesn't know anything. Like, the fact is that Tywin first clues him in, like, anyone that says, I am the king.
Is no
doesn't
king at all.
Yeah, exactly. And that hits Joffrey pretty hard.
Right.
The other response, Tywin doesn't even respond because, as you know, you see the look on Cersei's face and, you know, Tyrion's face.
It's like, oh no, danger zone, danger zone, danger zone.
Tywin's about to get up from that table and strangle Joffrey.
Yes.
And there's going to be a new king.
He's like, I'm fighting this entire war for this little shit right here.
Yeah. And so they're all just like, you know, basically it's like, you know, Tywin just decides to, you know, restrain himself, which we can clearly see is you know, something that's it's
but his eyes are
bulging.
Practice. He's got the look on his face.
For him, it's practice. He has years of experience dealing with this intolerance, and he's basically just like, the king is tired, you know. And then Pycelle, it's like, get him the milk of the poppy, and Joffrey's having a tantrum. It's like, you know, I don't want milk of the poppy. I'm not tired, and he's just like, you will.
I think the interesting thing that's established here, right? So we have Ramsay and we have Joffrey, right? Kind of the two resident psychopaths of the show. And the whole thing is that the interesting conjunction that, or rather, the juxtaposition, I guess, is the word that I'm looking for here, that kind of happens between the two of them, is that you see Ramsay kind of on the rise, well, you see Joffrey kind of on the low end, because Joffrey throughout this entire season, right, after kind of all the torture, all the brutality that he committed in the first two seasons, this season kind of saw him on the backseat, right? Saw him placated with the Tyrells. He really only got like a couple moments to like torture Tyrion and Sansa, and then you see that he's brutally murdered in the beginning of the next couple episodes of the next season. And it kind of shows Tywin almost has this, it's hilarious because when Joffrey dies, Tywin almost has this look of relief. It's like, oh, thank God, I've got the more manageable of the two grandchildren now. But in this instance, like, it just showed that, like, again, where the true, and he even says it in his discussion with Tyrion in the next episode. Is like, Tyrion is like, you just sent the most powerful man in Westeros to bed. He's like, you're a fool if you think that he's the most powerful man in Westeros. He's like, a treasonous statement. Joffrey's king, and he's like, you really think a crown gives you power? And it kind of leads again. It shows where these characters are, where they sit. It shows how Tywin is like this brilliant chess master that is able to take all of these pieces and kind of put them together in order to like make his own view of the world happen. Like he says, he's all about the family. He's all about maintaining the Lannister legacy, right? And Tyrion is like, you know, you committed this dreadful act that not only kind of like in a way like sired our family, you know, obviously, you know, Walder Frey gets all the blame, so you kind of get a little bit of like, you know, political maneuvering and bookkeeping there. But again, he's like, look, the North is never going to forget this. And this ultimately could do more harm than good rather than attempting to come to a peaceful solution. And Tywin just kind of doesn't have it. He doesn't have it at all. And then Tywin is just more so kind of like, you know, you need to focus on Sansa. You need to focus on putting a child in her. And he's like, do you think that she's going to want to have sex with me more or less now that you've murdered her and the entire rest of her family? And Tyrion, again, it's like, to me, this episode is like the entire dissolution of everything that happens between Tyrion and Tywin. Not that they really have that much of a relationship to begin with, but this episode just kind of hammers home. And like, I think it's a really great, like, come full circle moment for the first episode of the season where Tyrion was attempting to ask Tywin for control of Casterly Rock. And his whole thing is, it's like, you always preach all this bullshit about family, but when have you ever made a decision that wasn't beneficial to you over the family? And he kind of tells him, you know, this story about how he almost killed him the day that he was born, obviously, both because of his physical appearance and because of what he did to Tywin's wife, his mother. And it's like, I wanted to bring you out into the sea and let the waves take you, but I didn't because you're a Lannister, you know? And it kind of, it both does and it both supports and refutes Tyrion, like, everything that he thinks about his father, you know? And he has this really tear-jerking moment where he goes to tell Sansa, and he has to break down this awful news to her. And then after the fact it's revealed, she's crying. She already knows what's happened. And it's just tragic, ultimately, you know? But again, like, the sequence is so well done. Like, this entire sequence to me just shows is like, yeah, who's in control? Tywin is in control, which is kind of like what this entire season has been building to, whether you realize it or not, you know? There's really only two major other sequences that happen here.
Yeah, well, it's when Varys kind of gives diamonds to Shay and
Right.
says, "Hey, go start a new life," and you know, she refuses outright. It's like, Tyrion can come tell me himself, you know, if he wants me to go. And you know, this is one of those scenes that I don't think is necessarily we're ever going to know for sure if Tyrion put Varys up to it, or Varys literally just kind of did it because it's like, listen, you're a distraction. He needs to be on his A game right now. You know, things aren't so well in King's Landing. You know,
Right.
Tywin has almost an absolute control. So like, Tyrion is going to need, you know, focus and not have, you know, you as a distraction. So Varys could have very well been acting on his own, or he could have been acting on.
Yeah, I was going to
Tyrion's,
ask that. Do you think that he's acting on Tyrion's behalf, or do you think he's acting on his own? Because if it was anybody else, right? Like, if it was Bronn, you would have known that. If it was Bronn or Podrick, you would have known that Tyrion would have sent it. But Varys really is the only character that can kind of, at least for these first couple seasons, is really the only character that can kind of operate on his own agenda without really needing to be motivated by anyone. So,
like, I have to believe that Varys is acting on his own, because you know, that just gives weight to the character. Like, he's able to make these moves. You know, he's doing it, like he said, in the name of the realm, and he's sort of this dodgy shadow figure that, you know, has resources. Obviously, he doesn't have absolute power, but he has resources to shape things, and I think this is one of those attempts for him to do so that just goes wrong. And, you know, obviously it actually has the opposite effect, which fuels fire, you know, in the storyline of Tyrion and Shay, which will lead to what next season. So, you know, that's what I want to believe, because, you know, ultimately I think it's a little bit storytelling, but, you know, that's the one thing that's good about the writing of this show, is that there are a lot of gray areas that allow you, the viewer, to sort of think about you know, what you want it to be, you know, versus what it actually is. And, you know, maybe you get some hints by some other scenes and supporting evidence for your case, but you know, it's not everything's on the nose. You know, everything here is sort of like left up to the viewer's imagination.
Absolutely, yeah. So the only other major sequence that we really need to talk about in King's Landing is obviously Jaime finally made it back. It's funny because it happens in like the last third of the episode, where it's like the episode's almost wrapped up, it's almost finished. But I think it's funny where you have Jaime and Brienne, they have no knowledge of anything that just happened. They kind of walk through the gates. They both kind of just look exhausted from their journey, and their journey was like, for the most part, wrapped up a couple episodes ago in the Bear and the Maiden Fair. So it's kind of funny, like, just how they like have this look of like exasperation, where after all this death and misery has happened to all these other characters, they're like, oh yeah, those two, they finally got somewhat of like a calm, relaxed ending. And he, like, the last moment you see of him is he finally is reunited with Cersei, and they haven't seen each other since the middle of season one.
Can you explain to me why Cersei's playing with seashells all of a sudden? It's like she has a giant box and she's just like sitting there, like playing with you know, the shells, and you know, Jaime comes in behind and goes, Cersei?
Yeah.
and basically she turns and like looks at him. And then there's this great shot where he's looking at her, and then he looks down and the camera sort of you know, tracks down to the hand.
Yeah.
You know, and it's great because it's visual storytelling once again. It's like the two of them kind of noticing, and then, you know, he's tracking her eyes, and clearly the first thing she notices is going to be the fact that he's missing a hand and is a changed man.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. And it's continued in the next episode. So again, like just a brief moment, but again, a very subtle setup for what's going to happen in the next couple episodes. So we got one more major big storyline that happens in this episode before we get to kind of the closing shot, which again, I wanted to get your thoughts on that, but we got to hit Dragonstone first. With Dragonstone, there's a lot that happens here. This entire storyline is like the entire second half of the episode where...
Well, Dom, let me say, Mhysa don't want to rush, so let's go to Dragonstone.
Yes,
you know?
let's go to Dragonstone. I hate you so much right now.
Well, with the Jar Jar Binks, you know,
me to relive the Jar Jar Binks thing, bring it back full circle. But Davos, it's interesting. I love the cut that's established here, where it cuts from obviously Sam writing the letter to the letter, obviously in Dragonstone again. Some more of that, like that famous Game of Thrones time hopping that the later seasons were criticized so much for. But again, it's like, are you sure the first couple seasons didn't do that too? And you see this letter on this stack of, you know, letters that Davos.
Well, I think the teleportation, the biggest one is the fact that Varys goes to Westeros and then comes back,
and then goes back to Essos, and somehow
yeah,
on this ship.
it's yeah. His teleportation is definitely the biggest offense.
Right.
I think for the most part,
Yeah. Could have teleported out of there though when that dragon started to roast him though.
Yeah, I think everything else is fine, but whatever.
Yeah. So Davos is reading through letters. He's like, what's it called? It's like, I love how Shireen is just kind of breaking down. It's just like, again, poking more fun at the English language. It's like, enough. Why is the G pronounced like an F? And she's like, I don't know. It just is. It's kind of funny. And then, a little more humorous moment building up, like kind of the relationship between those two. Then the bells start ringing. Davos is like, wait, are we under attack? Like, what's going on here? He goes to see Stannis and Melisandre. Stannis has a letter in his hands. Davos is kind of like, what's going on here? And Stannis is like, the usurper, Robb Stark is dead. And you can just see all the color just leave Davos' face because he's like, fuck. And again, just the brilliance of how this episode is executed and why it really might be my favorite of the 3 season finales, where you have the dissemination of this one event throughout all these different storylines and kind of how it impacts and pushes them forward in a way where now, because this act has happened to one of Stannis' enemies without him having had to lift a finger because of the leeches and the blood magic, Davos realizes like, oh no, this is the proof. This is everything that I cautioned Stannis against. This is the proof that he needs.
Yeah.
To know that sacrificing Gendry might work.
Listen, this Stannis storyline, Melisandre, Davos, this is all good stuff. And from the moment Stannis was introduced, really up until he secures the North, all that stuff is brilliant. And here it is again. Like the leeches apparently worked. Melisandre and Stannis are staring at him. Like prep Gendry because we got to take care of him. And throughout this whole sequence, we see Davos go to the prison. He's sitting there. He's talking with Gendry. It's like, I'm from Flea Bottom. And Gendry doesn't believe that. He believes Davos is a lord. But, Davos basically goes ahead and starts to explain, what the streets are like, in Flea Bottom and exactly things that you wouldn't know unless you actually spend some time there. So, he gets some credence. He gets Gendry on his side, and the two of them are having this kind of sort of passive conversation, despite the fact that he's locked up. And yeah, I think you're right. This is the moment when Robb Stark's killed and the leeches are proven true. This is where Davos is. As he puts it in his own words, like when he opens the cell and says, Gendry, I'm getting you out of here. Gendry says, is this a trick? Just sort of like Theon, has been tortured and whatnot. He's like, is this a trick? And Davos goes, not on you, on me. And it's because, he knows what's right. And now he knows that Stannis and Melisandre are going to kill him. And it's like, he knows he has to take this action, and he knows he's not going to do anything but this action. And so therefore the trick is on him. And I think it's just brilliant. Like just how self-aware Davos is, just, how how much conviction he has. He is sort of, I think, my favorite character throughout the series, just like you've said, just because he's so consistent. He's utilized in the right scenes, in the right way. It's like, I don't think there's too many moments of Davos in the show that you can argue is wasted.
Absolutely.
He's just sort of a great supporting character, no matter what storyline you put him in.
Right. He's 100% a supporting character, but again, he still proves that he is a very vital character going forward, because again, the whole thing that's established here is it's not that he never had any doubt that the whole blood magic would work. It's just that he has said it multiple times. Again, he is a man that if the decision presents itself, he will always make the moral righteous decision. And he knows in his heart of hearts, it doesn't matter if the blood magic worked or not. He knows that this act is wrong, and he is not going to let it stand. And even though it almost results in his death, it comes very close. Again, Davos, I think that this season, another reason why Davos is so compelling is because I have never seen a character face death more times in a season than he has, and just, again, continue to, dodge right around it. It's like you can see it's almost like a Wanda thing where he sees the bullet coming right for him, and then he kind of, does the dodge and swerve around it, like the curved bullet thing.
Yeah, the Matrix.
Kind of, yeah, that's almost kind of what happens here, where, again, he's being charged by Davos and Melisandre. Melisandre is like, you've doomed us all based on kind of a hunch, and your moral righteousness, and your as cost Stannis this war. Again, subtle foreshadowing there, because Stannis never kind of really recovers from this moment, but then Davos he's able to
My favorite part is he brings, all this reading storyline finally comes to
finally pays off in a really rich, satisfying
and
way.
it's like, here's this letter, the Night's Watch has sent this, and essentially they kind of read it. They're like, oh, this sounds pretty terrible, but Melisandre takes it, puts it in the fire, and says, hey, the real war is to the north, beyond the wall, and there's some deadly creatures. And it's like, Stannis just looks at Davos and says, well, the very magic that you are against
so much
just saved your life. And
pretty great. Pretty great.
Yeah,
and again, it's more subtle foreshadowing of how the walkers are going to play more of an impact going forward. Because again, Melisandre, even though it's kind of more spread out as time goes on, the whole thing is that the arch enemy of her god R'hllor is the Ancient One, who is the personification of some form of the White Walkers, right? So that, of course, is established here as well. The only thing is, I really wish that they had gone kind of more so into that, once they kind of tackled the origin of the White Walkers in season 6 with kind of their creation by the Children of the Forest. But hey, that goes into more of the mythology stuff that it almost feels like the show was almost a little bit too scared to tackle in the later seasons. But again, it shows
they didn't really need to go that far in depth. They showed us sort of a glimpse, and that's what we got. But listen. We're headed in that direction. The White Walkers are going to become, start to become a bigger threat. We're not going to see it necessarily in season 4. I think we get a little bit of a tease.
I think we only get one episode and one sequence of them in season 4 with the whole baby thing before they come back in full force in season 5.
The season finale, and then season 5 is where it busts wide open. So we still got a little bit of political jockeying to do before it becomes the ultimate threat. But hey, it's the White Walkers are coming. Winter is coming, so to speak.
Absolutely, the White Walkers are coming, and winter is coming indeed. So one
more season away.
Yes, the closing sequence of this episode. I don't know, this is always been weird to me, but this to me is the only demonstration in this entire episode of, okay, this storyline is wrapped up and we really don't know what to do next, where it almost feels like they just throw this scene in to have a conclusion where the final episode really doesn't cover Daenerys at all. It just shows it's oh, all the slaves in Yunkai have been freed. So
I think it's
it looks good. It's shot well.
It kind of reminds me of a couple of documentaries where they go to remote tribes, and all the people are living in unison, and they have a really good societal structure, in remote locations.
Right.
So it seems like it's sort of inspired by that, sort of people that are more in tune with their environment and surroundings, and not as civilized, because these are slaves. They've been held down. They haven't really been given the luxuries of, society and, the technologies and whatnot that the elites have had. So I feel like there's a little inspiration, there. But, I think it's a great scene in terms of we've seen in Daenerys be able to lead armies and, her counselor, her advisors, but we really haven't seen her lead people.
Right.
And I think this is the first moment where we see her free everybody. And, obviously, Missandei is sort of translating oh, she set you free. But then she stops her right there and puts into her own words that, it's I can't give you your freedom. You have to take it. It's yours to take. That's all I've done is giving you this opportunity. And that's sort of her growing up, her becoming someone that can lead the people in general. And, that's when the whole, Mhysa thing comes up, and they all accept her. And I feel like that's what we're seeing here, a contrast between the Lannisters, who don't really care about the people. They don't really care about the political opposition. They just want to kill, and control power. It's all about the family name. I think Varys says that in the scene with Shay. Hey, it's neither of us have a last name here, so therefore we're never going to be accepted here. We're seeing a contrast in this episode that Daenerys, has sort of freed these people, and has, in this moment at least, the love of those people. And that's sort of a contrast to what we're seeing in Westeros. And I think that's really how we're ending the season, is showing that she's growing into her own as a leader of not just, the armies and the political apparatus, but she's also understanding how to rule over people. And that's, I think, the biggest threat to those in Westeros.
That's really interesting, yeah, because the whole thing that I always thought about this ending shot, this ending sequence, is like, wow, after a season of Daenerys really coming into her own, really establishing like what she's going to be doing going forward, at least for the next couple seasons, I always thought it's like, man, this really just feels like such an insert because they needed to like wrap this up, because the whole thing is that she kind of, again, she has this really interesting and smart way of maneuvering around and taking over Yunkai in a way that is such the opposite of like kind of your very drastic show of force on Astapor. And then obviously, we end up spending time with Meereen. We wrap up her storyline from Storm of Swords when she takes over Meereen, obviously in season 4. And then the next 2 seasons are ultimately dedicated to her trying to learn how to rule over Meereen. And so I always thought that this sequence was like kind of weirdly out of place in this episode, if that makes sense. I almost think it would have been like more interesting for them to cut this sequence and have it almost be like pick up at the beginning of season 4. But at the same time, like, I see what you're saying there. Definitely. And it definitely...
Yeah, maybe they didn't spend enough time, and maybe sort of the lead up to that. Maybe I'm reading a little too much into it, but
it makes sense, though.
Yeah, the fact is, like, I think that's what it's there, and that's the intention. So whether or not it has the right amount of weight, that would that you would prefer, that's up for debate. But
right.
I think it kind of cleanly ends the season because you get that overhead shot. Everyone's
really great shot, by the
accepting her, and it really. Westeros and Essos, those are really the 2 factions, Daenerys versus the Lannisters. They end up in 2 different positions at the end of the season. Someone that, Dany, who has definitely a different power, a different, way of ruling, versus the Lannisters, who, basically, like you said, broke the, Xenia, and just like, is doing these ruthless plans and just killing everybody, and there's really no consequences. There's no love for the people, and so I think it ties it up nicely. You don't have to overthink it. It just sets us up to have a clean slate of like these new storylines when we start season 4.
100%. And so if there's one thing that I can take away from season 3, it is that it's the definition of a clean slate season. We are wiping the board. We are starting from scratch. We are revamping. We are kind of refocusing our storylines where they need to go ultimately. Before we get out of here, I just wanted to bring back a tradition that we really haven't done in the last couple episodes. I just wanted to break down all the people that we lost this season, the Talkin Thrones death count. Surprisingly enough, at least for the first half of the season, like surprisingly a bloodless season, but we did lose there were a couple episodes in here where I didn't catch any deaths, but we lost a lot of people this season, specifically a lot of main characters. Episode 1, Valar Dohaeris, we lost all the Night's Watch brothers who were killed in the attack against the White Walkers. Then we didn't really have any deaths until episode 4, and now as Watches ended, where Daenerys roasted the slave masters, and then we had the deaths of Craster and Lord Commander Mormont at Craster's. Then in the midpoint, Kissed by Fire, we had the death of Beric Dondarrion for the 6th time before he gets brought back to life by Thoros, and then the deaths of Martin and Willem Lannister, the 2 Lannister boys, and Rickard Karstark and his men. Then the Climb, we said goodbye to Ross. Second Sons, we said goodbye to the 2 heads of the Second Sons, Miro and Prendel Nagazan, as well as the White Walker that Sam kills. Reigns of Castamere, easily probably the bloodiest episode yet. RL, the Warg Wildling, Talisa Stark, Robb Stark, Catelyn Stark, and then Walder Frey's 8th wife. And then Mhysa, the Frey soldiers that Arya kills. Famously, again, the one point also that we forgot to bring up as well, again, that Roose Bolton does bring up in his little interaction between Walder Frey before it kind of just disappears and goes to the back burner for the next couple episodes, is that the Blackfish did escape, which is a thing that you don't really know, because the last you see of the Blackfish in the Reigns of Castamere is he says he's getting up to go and find, the privy, as they call it there. But famously he escapes, and then we see where that leads in season 6, only a couple seasons later. But hey, if that isn't Thrones, then I don't know what is. So that is it. That is our recap of season 3. Those are the first 3 seasons of Talkin Thrones. Again, we're not going to be putting out any new episodes in December. This is the last episode that we will be putting out in the year of 2021. We will be back, though, in January of 22. We'll be back in full force. We'll be picking it up with season 4, episode 1, entitled 2 Swords. We'll be taking that all the way through to the very final episode, the Iron Throne. Pat, thank you once again so much for continuing to be my incredible co-host throughout this entire journey. I'm glad that you were able to kind of like rediscover this love of Game of Thrones that was kind of lost after like kind of the bad taste of the final season. But where can the good people find you on the interwebs as always?
Hey, listen, it's been a good year so far. I'm looking forward to next year when we get to continue Talkin Thrones. So you're going to be able to find me, here on with the Talkin TV family, obviously, Talkin Thrones, once we start back up in January. But other than that, I always threaten every, single week that I might post on Instagram. So at Patrick W. Huber, if you want to be there when I actually, post something for the first time in such a long time, go ahead and follow. But hey, otherwise I'm just going to enjoy life, enjoy, coming back onto this thing in January and talking some Thrones.
Absolutely. And Talkin Thrones, we will be. You can, of course, follow us on the Talkin TV channel at Talkin TV Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, where we still have posts every single day coming to you, usually twice a day. We've got another episode of Succession, the recap show, coming this week. By the time this episode goes up, we have 3 episodes left of that. We've only got 5 weeks left of the year as far as podcast content goes. We got a couple more top 10 lists. We are only still continuing to truck forward and give you, the people, the content that it is that you deserve. And of course, you continue to support us by clicking the subscribe button down below, clicking the bell next to it. That way you guys get notified every time we put up new content. Be sure to also follow me, of course, on my platforms at Movie Nerd Reviews on Facebook and Instagram. And as always, people, we'll be back in January when winter is really upon us. 12 seasons of a short film. Watch more fucking movies.
Yeah, Mhysa watch more films, right?
Mhysa watch more films, indeed. We'll see you guys next time.
Anyway.